Thanks, everyone. Well, I have the pleasure of talking about three different surveys that have been going on. So there's a lot of graphs following an incredible photocentric, story-filled presentation, but we're going to make this exciting. So you're going to see some photos that you've seen other places. So this is Joel rescuing a cat. Joel's awesome. We're like Dick said, we miss him. So very first thing I want to talk about is the National Preparedness Goal. And I'm not going to read all this, but pretty much what it's saying, and this, if you look at the bottom, this is the National Planning Framework. So this is from the government, that we need to make sure that the whole community is covered during any sort of incident. That includes animals. So children, animals, vulnerable populations. So I wanted to point that out and make sure that everybody sees that it's important that we take care of everybody. This is a quote by this incredible man that I know. Basically, he was talking to the Wall Street Journal, talking about how ill-prepared we are as a nation when it comes to animal-related incidents. And I can't tell you that's enough. That's so true. We are so ill-prepared. Every time I go somewhere, we make do. But really, if we were to plan ahead and we were to put as much focus as possible, we wouldn't be as ill-prepared. This photo here is from Moore, Oklahoma in 2013, where there was a tornado that came through and devastated the area. I was there with another organization, and this is a nurse that was trying to comfort this dying dog. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a survey from that was taking place for the national capabilities of animal response and emergencies. So we've been talking a little bit about planning. Everything that I'm going to be talking about right now is about planning. This first survey that took place is called the NCARE. And basically what this survey is it's trying to determine what the needs are for the nation when it comes to animal response and animal-related emergencies during disasters. So they wanted to create this assessment tool and try to figure out what was needed. We think people and communities are prepared, but how prepared are they really? And so this was a 1 to 2 year project that took place. So the first phase happened across the state level, and it launched in September of 2015, and it went to all the emergency managers across the nation, and they were encouraged to reply. Now, if they weren't the person that had the information, we hope that they sent that information or the survey to somebody that could answer these questions. And then, in order to get the response that we needed, which, as you can see, 48% of the states completed it, there was a lot of follow-up. There was a lot of contacting people, making sure that, hey, can you fill this out? So there was a lot of work to it. Then once this was done, we know what the states think that they have. Now let's go to the counties and see if we can figure out if the same thing. So over 1 million surveys went through, and so this was huge. 74% of the counties got back to us on this, which is huge. This is across the nation. So we wanted to focus on 3 different things: organization and infrastructure. So you've heard the term SART, State Animal Response Teams, and CARTs, County Animal Response Teams, those sort of things. Level of coordination. So how well is everything working together? How well are people working together and different organizations working together? And then the stuff. Do they have the equipment and supplies that they need in order to do this? These puppies were from Arkansas just a couple weeks ago. I tried to add some cute photos when it comes to all the things. So, state animal response teams. So here it says we have 31. It's actually 32. California has a SART. So this kind of shows you, the dark green shows you which states have a state animal response team, which the light greens, which ones don't, and then the gray is unknown. And like I said, California does have a state animal response team. Maybe, there we go. And then CARTs. So who has CARTs? So the dark green are the ones that have over 50% of their counties have CARTs. Light green, less than 10%, and then again with the gray, not too sure. So then when you do a SART and a CART combined, the light green is no SART and less than 50% of the counties. There's 12 of those. But then there's 8 that have CARTs and SARTs, or a SART and then over 50% of CARTs. Looks like I took away that 50% with that. So anyways, so then we need to see, well, you have these different organizations. What are they doing? So you can see here that, and I didn't include the color code, but you can see that they're doing training, exercises, some have web resources, a newsletter, and then some are actually not doing anything. So they have these CARTs and these SARTs, but they're really not doing anything with it. So if you're not going to do anything with it, that number is going to dwindle, and you're going to have less. So you need to keep active, and there's various reasons we'll talk about in just a little bit why those organizations may or may not be doing stuff. So one of the things that we did is try to get comments back from everybody, and so what we found is that there's a variety of models. So when we start talking about CARTs and SARTs, there's all kinds of different models. So they're not all the same. So depending on where you are, they may be state resources, they might be local volunteers. It just varies dramatically. So all these different organizations, you can't really compare them apples to apples. Then we want to start talking stuff. So when you have a state, how many of those have a cache? And 74% of them have caches. Some of the large counties, because when you start looking at counties, you have large and small counties. The larger counties have caches. So one of the things for you to think about are, do you have a cache of supplies? And if you do, and I'm going to go into this in just a moment, how much and what supplies? You've seen some of the photos from the earlier in the day where we have these huge operations, those shelters where there's a ton of crates. That's usually what shows up is the crates. But what you don't think about is the kitty litter, the pooper scoopers, the water bowls, how you're going to give water to the chickens, the people supplies, toilet paper. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, all the logistical stuff that you need. So all those sort of things. So when we start talking about cache of supplies, we have a similar result where 9 states have no cache, and 13 states have a cache, and then 50% of their counties have cache. So again, the dark green is the better number, the light green is the less, and then of course we have the gray that we don't have a reply from. Maybe. There we go. So dedicated animal equipment. So this is one where when we start looking at dedicated animal equipment, so we talked about cages and carriers, but then livestock panels. Are we talking large animal, small animal, and then how much we have? So some of these different, these are specific to the counties or the states. So it's not talking about maybe there's 3 or 4 counties that come in together and have a regional asset. So this is all individual stuff. So we're kind of finding out that there's quite a few of the states and the larger areas have a decent amount of cash. But then when we start looking at other organizations that work with them, how much will those two come together? And I'll talk about that in just a second. So it has VRC on here. I think this is the first time you heard this, is a Veterinary Reserve Corps. How many states here that have a Veterinary Reserve Corps? Can you raise your hand? Okay. These Veterinary Reserve Corps are also not apples and apples. Some have 10 members, some have over 2,000 members. So in Washington State, where I live, we have, I think, 100, I'm guessing 100, maybe 200 members. I usually see about 50 of them. And then we would start talking about sheltering. So sheltering, and what's the, oops, sorry about that, co-located sheltering. So again, in planning, if you don't have a plan for a shelter, then when it happens, you're going to be scrambling trying to get everything. So we want to try to talk to them about what they have for sheltering. So again, light green, there's 5 states that have no sheltering plans, and less than 50% of the counties have sheltering plans. And then we have 12 that have, the states have sheltering plans for, and then the counties have over 50%. So when it comes to this, this is really important. And when people think of animal rescue, it's sheltering that they think of. There's a lot of different things, but we're trying to get, like Dick said earlier, we're trying to kind of get out of that sheltering model, but this is still where we are when we start thinking of animal rescue. So if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that you have a plan for them. And again, like Dick mentioned before, if you're going to go rescue animals, you have to have somewhere to put them. So it's important to have some sheltering plans. So one of the things that we've learned from the survey from people is that a lot of people are frustrated with their current plans. They have no money to purchase the supplies, they have no training, and they don't have a team. So how are they supposed to do this? But it did make people think, maybe I should be doing this, or maybe I should start thinking of this, which is good. It's never too late to, well, I guess it can be too late to start, but if you start today, start planning today, or start, tomorrow, you'll be a lot better. So hopefully this hit a lot of people, and every one of these surveys that you're going to be seeing, you're going to see that there's different questions, and you're going to see some similar questions, trying to get people to think. And when I say people, it's mainly emergency managers or people with jurisdiction of having authority. Then what we did is we did a report card, and the report card shows it's all your local capabilities, being your carts, your caches, plus your state capabilities, including your SARTs, caches, VRC, and all that sort of thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of those and we're going to add them together. So and we're going to do it by a region. So if this region has 6 carts plus 6 county caches, plus 5 county caches, plus 4 SARTs between 4 different states, plus state caches of 3, plus 2 VRCs, they get a score of 20. Does that make sense? You add all these things up and you get a score. So regionally, this is what we get. So if you look at your region, here in New York, we're doing pretty good. You score pretty high up on the scale. The farther west you go, north and west, not quite so much. Where I live, we need some work. So, and then we didn't really get a lot of data from Region 1. So this goes right back to, again, what Dick was saying earlier with your different regions. And this is showing how prepared, based on that survey, these different regions are. So hopefully this is something that you can take back and say, well, you know what, my state isn't as prepared as it should be, or even if you're in Region 2, you can still be more prepared, so see how you can get involved. And then, based on that, what else do you need? So do you need training? 84% of the states said, yeah, we need training. Do you need equipment? Do you need subject matter experts? Or do you not need anything? This is one that I found was pretty interesting, is there were 3 states that said they don't need anything. So that means they're totally prepared for any type of disaster, which I know that I can always be more prepared at home. So anyways, this is something, let's see if I can get this to work. That Animal Emergencies Preparedness Self-Assessment Checklist is available on ASPCA Pro, and you can go fill it out. So I suggest you go check that out and take it to your local community and get that going. That's a really good tool to get started, because a lot of what I found out with disaster preparedness is a lot of times people don't get started because they get overwhelmed. So if you have a simple checklist like this, that might get the ball rolling to get you started. So download that, it's free. So that survey took place 2015 to 2017. So based on that survey, Dick went to Washington State and said, hey, can you do a sample, a similar survey across the state with all the counties to see if that survey was accurate? So Washington State Department of Agriculture went and did a survey. And this was one where there's some counties that didn't want to respond. Some, it took a lot of poking to get a response. So as of April, the end of April, we had about 75% of the counties responding, which is great when it comes to any kind of survey. So it was mailed to everybody, all the agencies having jurisdiction across the state. And this is kind of what we found. I'm going to tell you that I started out these slides trying to show what kind of disasters happened in Washington. And so you'll start seeing that. Of course, the one I didn't include is the one that happened right by Dick's house, is an earthquake. But anyways, so here's one that some of you may recognize. This is Mount St. Helens. But this question is does your county have a section within the Comprehensive Emergency Plan, the CEMP, that addresses animals? So 70% of those counties said yes. So that's good. 70% of them have some sort of plan in their CEMP. Does your county have a CART? So only 25% of them have CARTs within the county. Comparing this, this shows that 25% of the counties have CARTs. When you look at the national survey, you can see that less than the light green and less than 10%, and then the over 50% have CARTs. So just kind of comparing the national survey with the Washington State survey. So then it's what groups comprise your CART? And select all apply. So is it Department of Agriculture? Is it nonprofits? Is it individual members? Is it a CERT team? Whatever. Who comprises this? And most of them are county or city agencies that have these carts. And then we also get tsunamis in Washington State. So when we have that earthquake, it'll create this big wave out on the coast. So then how are these carts organized? This is another really important one. So 20% of them are under direction of emergency management, and then 60% of them are under direction of animal services. So this is really good to know. So when Dick or myself are talking about agency having jurisdiction, who's the one that's going to have jurisdiction of that cart? Is it the same one that has jurisdiction of authority for that area? So then 40% of these are nonprofits. So if it's a nonprofit might be Joe Schmo's Animal Rescue, or it might be a Humane Society, something like that. So a decent amount of these might be nonprofits. So you need to know, if you're going to be tapping into those, who those organizations are. And this is a windstorm that happened in 2016. And when we start talking about these disasters, we also need to look at what does that impact. And so in my area, whenever I was in the fire service and we had a windstorm, that automatically meant that we didn't have power for 2 weeks because we were out in the middle of nowhere. So that was a big one. First, you couldn't get the fire engines anywhere because of the roads being blocked. So when it comes to animal rescue or evacuation, they couldn't leave. They had to shelter in place because they couldn't get anywhere until crews were able to cut the trees that were blocking the road. And they can't cut the trees until the electric company ensures that those power lines are down. And then, is the CART an active member of the local emergency planning committee? Do they have a say in what's actually taking place when it comes to planning for disasters? And 40% of them yes, and 60% of them no. So you have this organization that's supposed to be going out and doing the rescues that have no say in planning for these rescues. So without that communication, you're not really getting anywhere. This cart might have 100 people, 200 people that can do something, or it might just be one. So you might be saying, well, the cart's going to take care of it. Well, we have 5 people in this cart. How much are they actually going to be able to do? So that's an important number to remember. Is it just depends on that communication, that coordination. So it's really important to make sure that you include everybody in the planning process. How active is this cart or this group? So in the last 12 months, they responded, or they met 1 to 3 times. So that's 1 to almost quarterly, so some of them are meeting more than others. So it just depends on how capable that cart is on what they'll be able to do. And this is from, this cow is from a wildfire in 2015. In 2015, Washington State had the largest wildfire season in its history. And one of the fires I was on, we lost 250 head of cattle. And, everybody being in here, I'm assuming being animal welfare, thinks about the cattle, but the more the ag side, they think about the loss of property. So the money that's with that. So then you have public health, because now you have 250 head of cattle. What are you going to do with them? So everything when it comes to disaster just gets involved in other areas. Again, a good reason that you need to collaborate. So now you have, before I go into that, so this is our Emergency Operations Center that in Washington State, which Dick mentioned earlier, where all the magic happens, all the coordination, everything happens within the state. But now that the animal response functions have been organized at the county level, so what animal response actions have been coordinated? So again, when it comes to animal rescue, a lot of people think about the sheltering side, but then they also think about the animal search and rescue side, but then there might be large animal, small animal on both. There might be transportation or relo. So there's different steps or different parts to the whole thing when it comes to what the function is of that cart is. So we talked about a cache when it came to the national side, but then we also need to look at the cache at the local level. So it was about 50-50 when it comes to the cache with these carts. And then when we start talking about that, by the way, this is Dick at Hurricane Irma. And then so you have this cache, and people, a lot of communities will say, yeah, I have a cache of supplies, but how many? How many animals can you treat or handle with the cache of supplies? So when it comes to small animals, we're pretty good. They can handle 1 to 50 pretty well. But there was only one county that could handle more than 50 small animals with their cache of supplies. So we're talking major cities. City of Seattle, Bellevue, which is where this the NASAAEP summit is, Spokane, Yakima, some pretty big areas that can only handle, and there's only one that can handle more than 50. And then we went and start talking about large animals. 25% say that they can handle large animals. 70% say no, they can't. And then you look back at, well, who said no? And it might be some of those places like Seattle and those larger cities. So when we're talking cache, what are we able to do? This photo is, I believe this is the Woolsey fire. These llama were on the beach. This is whenever I first started hearing about it, I kept hearing about all the animals on the beach. And this is I don't know if any of you have been involved, had anything to do with a fire, but even in Dick's images, when you get into the fire, this is what the color everything is. It's not quite like this, but it's pretty close. It's a really eerie feeling. So you have these large animals, and you said that you can do them. How many can you do? So some of them said that they could do up to 50, And then again, only one said that they could do 50 to 100 animals. So one organization, one CART, said they could do 50 to 100 animals. And then now we're just going to start talking shelters. Dick mentioned Marlin earlier from Arkansas. This is Marlin. And this is a dog. This was an indoor dog that was only there for a couple days. And I'm glad because dog just needed a lot of love, like everybody. But anyways, Marlin was awesome with our relo of everybody. But you have pet-friendly shelters. And here are the capability. Here we have only 30% of the different counties are able to provide a pet-friendly shelter. So almost 70% said that they're not able to provide a pet-friendly shelter, which is huge. Cohabitated. So cohabitated where the people are with the animals. Now this is a homeless shelter, so it's a little bit different. But if we're looking at homeless shelters doing cohabitation, it seems to me that emergency shelter should be able to do cohabitation also. But out of the counties, 30% of them said that they have a plan for cohabitated shelters, which I think it was a lot higher than I would have thought. So I don't know if they really knew what the meaning of that was. And then we get to your area. What's the plan for providing veterinary assistance to animal shelters? So some of them said they have about 30% of them said they have a plan for veterinary assistance for animal shelters, and 70% of them said no. So when they don't have a plan for animal shelters, what do you think they're going to do? They're probably going to be calling those local veterinarians, or the local veterinarians are going to be taking this over some of these issues. And that's what I've seen on disasters when there isn't a plan, is the local vets are in place. And what's the local vet's priority? Their own patients, their own practice. So you're really relying on when they're able to go in there, which is one of the things that we ran into in Arkansas, is we had local veterinarians and they were incredible, but we weren't sure if we're going to get them when we needed them because they had to do stuff with their own practice. The next slide is about veterinary medical assistance. So they're going to be relying heavily on that private veterinarian. This is a select all that apply. So 100% of them said that they were going to be relying on that the private veterinarian. Some of them are going to be using existing county shelters, and then about 20% said that they're going to be using a veterinary medical association or the Vet Reserve Corps. So how many animals can your vet team treat? Most of them, about 60% of them, said they could do up to 50. And then about 40% of them said they could do about 50 to 100. So 50 to 100, when we're talking shelters, disasters that have, 1,000 animals or 500 animals, they don't have the veterinary capability to handle that. This was a decon station for search dogs in Oso, Washington, which was a major landslide that took place there, 2014. And then we start talking about MOUs. So does your county have an MOU with a response partner? Between 20 and 30% said yes, and almost 70% said no, and then a few, maybe 5% said they weren't sure. Unfortunately, this isn't in the data, but because I live in Washington State, my concern with that is that this almost 30% say yes, most of those have an MOU with the same organization. So my concern is when is that organization going to tap out and not be able to, they're going to be at their limit and not be able to do as much as the counties think that they're going to be able to do. And then the question came up, what additional needs do you have relating to animals? Do you want training? About 55% said yes. Assistance with developing a plan, almost 50% said yes. Subject matter experts, about 70%. Equipment, about 60%. Sheltering supplies, about 70%. and not sure about 12. So this was really important. So we've been talking about all this stuff. What do you need? And this is coming from Washington State, Department of Agriculture. And so they said, well, what do you need? And then they said, do you wish to be contacted by Washington State Department of Agriculture? And 80% said yes. So right now, what Washington State Department of Agriculture is doing is going on and working with those different counties on support, help, training to try to figure out what the needs are throughout the state. Now, this survey is really important for Washington State, and you're probably like, how does this help me? Well, I think the next place is New York, correct? New York State is the next place that we're hoping to launch this same sort of survey. And then hopefully it'll go around the country to various other states to really nail down what the capabilities are across the country based on those local needs. And then we have this one, the NASAAEP Veterinary Medical Response Capability Survey. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're the first people that's going to see anything to do with that. Is this correct? This is brand new. I think Dick pulled these numbers out last Friday. So all brand new stuff. If you look on every slide, it's going to show an answered and a skipped. So it shows you how many people answered it and how many skipped it. And I want you to pay attention to that as I'm talking, because you're going to see something that says 50%. Well, but it might have been only 5 people really answered that. So that 50% is still 50% of the 5 people they answered. So what type of entity serves as the Animal Emergency Response Coordinating Body? So here we have the majority of these are the Office of State Emergency Health Official. So that's where the majority are. Then we also have emergency support function. Dick had mentioned emergency support function 11, 6, 8 earlier in the day. Usually when it comes to animal-related issues, it's usually going to be ESF 11. Do you have a process to request assistance from in-state veterinary medical personnel, veterinarians and technicians, to provide treatment following a declared disaster or large planned event? So the good news is 49 people answered this and 1 skipped, but 70% of them said yes, they have a plan, a process. That cat's from Butte County. You can see it's burnt ears and burnt whiskers. Does your state currently have a veterinary response team or reserve veterinary team or similar? So most states, about half of them said that they had that. About 55% of the states said they have a group like that. And then what entity does this team fall under? And this was pretty interesting. So most of them fall under the Office of State Animal Health or Agriculture. But then there's some that's in veterinary school, NGOs. So they're all over the place on where these live. And you've already seen that photo. But again, on this one, this is an important one. 27 organizations answered this and 23 skipped. So
23 didn't have it. So
okay.
I'm on the next question.
Okay, got it. Then how are they activated? So by the way, I threw this in there because we don't always respond to nice, warm, or hot disasters. This actually is a cruelty case, but we do play in the snow and ice and all that if we need to also. But how is the Veterinary Reserve Corps activated? By a county request, a county declaration, state declaration, and then the other. So different ways that they can be activated. State declaration is the most common, and in Washington State, that's usually how it works. Well, it's only happened, to my knowledge, in recent years once, where they requested the Veterinary Reserve Corps. Then what type of training have you had in the last 24 months? And this is important just to figure out, all right, so like I said earlier, you have these things, but do you actually do anything with them? So some of them haven't had training, some of them done search and rescue for large animal, small animal, decontamination, sheltering, triage, and elsewhere. This photo is from earlier this year. We did a boot camp at LSU, and so this is a decon training that took place there. They put this stuff on the dog that the people deconning couldn't see, and so they deconned the dog, and then they took a black light to see if you could still see the quote-unquote cooties on the dog. Earlier, Dick showed a photo of the Anderson sling. Here's another photo of Anderson sling. But my point to this is how often are drills and exercises performed. If you're going to be using specialized equipment like this, you need to be practicing with it quite a bit. This, for disaster response, this particular piece of equipment isn't that useful. It's more for a one-on-one type of situation. But anyways, how often are the drills performed? Less than once a year is about 45% of the organizations. So some are annually, and then some are doing it twice a year, and then look, about 10% have never done any training or drills. Does your Veterinary Reserve Corps assisting individual veterinary professionals maintain a cache of supplies and equipment? So you have this, the people, do you have the stuff? And it was right at 50-50 have stuff to go along with their training and their team. Are all your assisting individual veterinary professionals able to provide the following veterinary medical supplies to animal treatment site? So can they do those vaccinations? Can they deworm and give medications, antibiotics, fluids, and equipment for sutures? So this was a really interesting one for me to make sure that you have the stuff to be able to do this. Because that's one of the things, we go out on these disasters and we can bring people, but if they don't have the stuff, especially when it comes to veterinarians, there's not a lot that they can do. And this was a big part of Arkansas just recently also was we got there and the medical group didn't have much. So we were able to get this grant and help provide stuff for them for the incident itself. And then what's the longest period your Veterinary Reserve Corps has been deployed? And most of them haven't been deployed for that long. Again, Dick mentioned earlier that disasters start locally, stay locally, and end locally. So a lot of times what happens is most of these incidents that happen are fairly short. They don't have these big long-term incidents. And then if they do, they bring in other people kind of in between. So this makes total sense. This photo was me last week. So and this is important, where's your funding come from? So grants, NGOs, state, county, emergency agencies, Department of Ag, State Veterinary Medical Association. Where does it come from? And most of them are from grants. If you were unable to meet the veterinary needs of your state, where would you request outside emergency veterinary medical resources? So would you go through an emergency management assistance compact, an EMAC? EMAC is where assets can be deployed state to state through an agreement. Would you be going through an NGO, a national NGO or a local NGO, or would you be going through the National Veterinary Response Team, the NVERT? One of the things I didn't mention on this survey, one of the main reasons for this particular survey was because there's been several disasters where the organizations involved with the disasters have requested for NVERT and they've been denied. So the NVERT saw, like, you can take care of this. You don't need this national team, but the locals that were on the ground said we need them. So again, that's part of the reason for this survey is to really see what's reality? You can say that you have a cart, but how active are they cart? You can say you have a reserve veterinary corps, but how active are they? So, or do they have the supplies for it? So that was part of this whole survey, is to see what everything was. So when there was a request, hopefully when there was a request for an invert, it's more transparent of what those actual needs are. Yes?
If you're requesting for EMAC or even NVER, how does that work with licensure?
Oh, that's going to be coming up in just a minute. That's one of the things with that is if you are trying to get state to state, how do you get those veterinarians licensed? And then is there some way, like Dr. G was talking about, can this state veterinarian work underneath someone else and still under their license? Is there some sort of clause to allow that to happen? So there's it's a really complicated individual state kind of thing on how that would actually work.
That's covered.
Okay.
Because it's been ratified by every state and by Congress. So if you are deploying under an EMAC, then your licensure carries forward as long as the receiving state approves it.
Did you guys hear that? Under EMAC, it's covered.
As long as the other state does what?
As long as the other state approves the receiving. But they wouldn't have asked unless they were willing to do that. And the only state we've had a problem with that in the past is Louisiana.
And here's your question right here. License reciprocity process to allow temporary licensure for invited veterinarians. So about 50% of them have a plan for that. This photo cracked me up that it's a horse nerd, but it's a Mustang GT. I would expect a license plate like this to be on a big truck or something. It is a Mustang, I guess. Okay. See, I didn't get. Maybe I just totally missed that.
Only got one on
Yeah. All right. So then this slide is talking about is there a need, or would you be willing to work with NASAAEP with any medical needs or treatment capabilities? So this is really cool because NASAAEP is the one that really put this together and is trying to figure out what you would need from NASAAEP. And so they're really trying to work on that. And you can see it's all over the board on what all they need. Can everybody read those okay? Okay. So sources of funding, of course, prerequisites for deployment. And that's a big one, is when you start having people deploy, is what are the prerequisites for them to be able to go? Do they need any ICS classes? Do they need sheltering training or whatever? So in order to become like a volunteer with our team, you have to take a few online classes from our pro website, and you have to take some FEMA classes. So what are some of those? So this is a pretty cool slide. And then I'm going to put in this plug also. The NASAAEP Summit, you've already seen this, so that's coming up. So I don't really need to talk about that. And then lastly, I'm going to end it on this photo here. This is from the campfire. And when this dog was in the shelter, I believe it was a female, she would be back in the corner, all tucked away, didn't want to have anything to do with anybody. We fed her, walked her. She was super sweet, but she just was shut down. When this gentleman came up and came to see if it was his dog, her complete demeanor changed. She went from this dog that was way back to all happy. And he just broke down and started crying. Because in this fire, he lost his home and he lost his wife. So he lost his other dogs and I believe all of his cats. So the work that we do isn't just helping the animals, it's helping people too. And this gentleman, he came back while we were there 3 or 4 times looking for his other animals just to see if they came in. And every time this dog was with them. And, have to thank everybody that was part of that shelter process on that. So here's my contact information. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm available just about any time. Thank you very much.